Welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be showing you the inner workings of an AI agent that we recently built. This one is called Invoice Processor. It's kind of boring. Actually, I did name the agent. I called it Iggy. So actually, let's call it AI agent Iggy, the invoice processor. Anyways, here's what Iggy does as an AI agent. Essentially, you know how in some accounting departments you will have a back office where you create a purchase order, you send that purchase order over to the consultant or the company, they send you an invoice with the purchase order attached, and then you create a bill and pay them. Essentially, this agent helps out with some of the processes involved around getting those emailed invoices and actually creating the bills. So this agent will receive the invoices emailed in an Airtable database. Once it finds the invoice, it's going to read in that invoice information. If all the information looks good, it's going to save a file and it's going to create a bill. If it doesn't look good, it's going to flag it for human intervention. So to create this, we are using Airtable as the base. We're using Make for the automations. For the agent parsing, we're actually using Google Vortex and we're using OpenAI. We want to have two separate integrations checking these PDFs just to validate that everything looks good. So we don't want to just rely on OpenAI. So this AI agent's like, nope, I'm going to send it here and there and compare the results. And if everything looks good between two completely separate platforms, very high confidence, let's go ahead and create the bill. The bills are going to be created in Quickbooks, and then we're going to save the file in Google Drive. So let me kind of show you how the base is set up. Here we have a base of inbound invoices. So there's a couple things here to note. Let me just move this field over. Essentially, I've got all these checkbox fields. These are like consensus fields. What we have here is anytime an invoice, here's a dummy invoice. Anytime an invoice gets put in the system, the image processing happens against multiple language models. And we have essentially two fields here. So we've got a amount 1, amount 2. This is basically OpenAI versus Google Vortex. Google Gemini Vortex, same thing with invoice date, invoice number, purchase order, company. Basically, we're copying two versions of this, and then we're creating these checkboxes to look and see if both language models agree on what's in there. Once we get all of these things checked, we consider that general consensus. Purchase orders, because not all invoices have purchase orders, is not included in this, but otherwise that would just be consensus, and that triggers a different process. So that's what we have here essentially. What happens is when an invoice comes in here, it gets sent to this integration. So I'm going to step through this integration step by step. You can pause the screen, or you can I'll add a link or something so you can like grab the resources if you wanted to use this as a start to build yourself. I'll include like the blueprint prompts and stuff like that. But essentially, this webhook here is gonna be triggered when new invoices come here, or if we click this rerun button. Once that happens, it'll trigger this automation, which just returns a record ID. This record ID goes through one of two different paths. This path is for processing. I should just call it processing. And then this path is the consensus path. So the processing path basically says, okay, let's go grab the invoice you passed, or all invoices if you didn't pass a record ID. Once we get all these invoices, we are going to get prompts. So I didn't hard code the prompts for OpenAI and Vortex. I actually put them in a prompt library. So here you will see different versions of the prompts that I have. And I actually created a interface for that. So if we click on interfaces, there's an interface here for the prompts. The one with the flag is always the active prompt. So I have one for OpenAI and I have one for Vertex. So I have noticed instances where when I am going and doing image processing, using language models to say, hey, here's an image, find me the red cat, or what, well, cats aren't red, but you get the point. Maybe some are. Anyways, find me whatever's in the picture and return it. In this case, I'm like, hey, you process scanned invoices, prepare them to be input. I give it a bunch of rules on the different attributes I want them to look for. And key here is I say, hey, when you get that data, return it as JSON, right? Returning as plain text without code block formatting, and I give it a structure. Okay, so this guides how the systems ran. So once I get the invoices, I get the prompts, and it's gonna, obviously, if it finds 10 invoices here, it's gonna do all these other steps 10 times or once, or however many invoices are found. Essentially, I grab the prompt that's set as primary, which is again the one that's flagged. Then I set the URL of the invoice to be processed through OpenAI. Now I do that because this first path here, one thing about Gemini and OpenAI, they don't like large images. So oftentimes we've run into issues where systems we're building, their clients or their customers are sending like gigantic PDFs. So I'm just using Convert AI to convert it to a PNG. So I just got the free version. Convert AI, you can use any platform. I'm not affiliated with this company or anything, but they give you 250 conversions, I think a month, if I remember, just for free. And otherwise it can get spendy depending on how many conversions you're trying to do. Anyways, for this example, we are going with free. The image is converted. I'm basically going to set the variable for all subsequent integrations to use this variable, and then I'm adding it to Airtable. So that's why if you look here, I'm adding it here just in case we need to rerun something. We have the smaller version, so we don't have to keep asking Convert API to reconvert the same image a million times. So once I get that image, I store it. I update this variable here, which is going to run for the OpenAI part. So I could call this OpenAI route Gemini Vertex. Essentially, after it copies that, it's going to go back down this path. It's going to grab the URL variable that was just updated. This, of course, is saying if we have a processed invoice, set that as the URL. Otherwise, or if it's null, well, it says it backwards, but same option. Basically, if there's a processed invoice, it uses processed invoice. Otherwise, it uses invoice URL. Every now and then, a client sends us something in a PNG, so we don't have to actually convert it. So that's what that's doing. But essentially, I'm grabbing that URL, then I'm going to OpenAI. Super simple. I'm analyzing the images. I'm just putting in the prompt from Airtable here, so I don't have to hard code. Once I set this up, I can literally just live in Airtable in interfaces when I'm configuring, retesting, things of that nature. So I have my prompt set up here. I'm passing in the image URL, and I'm using this model. Of course, I could use other models if I wanted to. This is the model that I'm using, and I'm setting up some max tokens. Not doing anything with the advanced setting. All the settings here are 1. Once I do that, I'm going to get those results that we said, hey, return in JSON. I'm going to parse that JSON out so that I can map it to Airtable. And then in Airtable, I'm simply going to map company, the first purchase order, the first invoice date, the first amount, and first due date. For this specific record ID here that we passed in this other step. So this is the step that's grabbing this invoice. Doing the same thing with Vertex. The one difference with Vertex is I can't pass it a URL directly unless the URL is attached to a Google Data Store, which it's not. It's an Airtable. So I am grabbing the variable of whatever the URL is here. I'm downloading it in this step. I'm going to Vertex AI. I have a project set up. Here's my prompt. I'm passing in this Vertex prompt, right? Passing in the Vertex prompt. Then I am saying grab this file from this HTTP. And of course, I am taking that JSON string and I'm going to Airtable and I'm mapping number 2. So purchase order number 2, company 2, invoice 2, invoice date 2, amount 2, due date 2. So basically just the other half of that. So that's what I'm doing in these 2 steps. So I could show you that probably live if I just run this and I go to my view data. Let me look here. Let's see if we have. So here we have an amount match that doesn't work. And let's see why. Looks like there's no amount on this first one, which is interesting. Let's rerun this first one here. First one is going to do this processing. It's going to OpenAI, of course, which is outputting these nice results for us. And Vertex, which is also producing nice results for us. We're mapping that. And we're going to go back here and see. So one thing I wanted to show as an example was flexibility. So we'll see here, notice these amounts. I fixed this before, but I'm going to show you how I did it. These amounts are different because when it looks like OpenAI is returning amount, it's returning 1,000 separator where Gemini is not, right? So what I can do if I go in my prompt library, let's just go in interfaces, it's a little bit easier to read. We can see for amount, I don't have any additional instructions. I just say, hey, just return the amount. But what I could do is say, when returning amount, do not use any thousands separator. 1,000 separators, including commas. Obviously I can't spell. Including commas. whoops, return the amount with 2 decimal points always. So I can copy and paste this to both Vertex and Google. It looks like Vertex was doing that, Google was not, or OpenAI was not. But once we do this, I can just go back into the base and I could just rerun it. So I could just rerun it and hopefully it'll, oh, so there's another thing that happened. I have this filtered by consensus. So let's go to grid view. You'll see that it did actually make those amounts exact. But what happened is it also updated this consensus checkbox. So consensus basically means all fields match, send it for processing. So when we are confident that, hey, Vertex and OpenAI both gave us the same exact data for all 7 fields, we believe this is ready for finalization. We'll move it to this stage, which is called ready to finalize. Once something gets in this stage, it runs the bottom half of this integration, which passes in a consensus ID, and then it grabs a record. Then it searches for that record, the purchase order. So consensus also means there's a purchase order attached. So what we have here is a purchase order table. So let's say after you give that client or freelance or consultant that purchase order, you put it here and you put the name of the company. This integration will find them in QuickBooks and then create a bill for them. So to search for all vendors, then they'll filter where that company is found, and then it basically will create a bill. Now this is pretty generic. It includes the amount from the purchase order, or it includes the amount that was in the original invoice, but technically you can and probably would want to have a purchase order amount, right? So if you had a purchase order amount, and you could even do further due diligence, right? So you could say purchase order amount is 5,000. And then once an inbound invoice gets to the ready to finalize stage where the purchase order is found, technically what we could do, let's just do it. Let's just add a purchase order, and we're going to link to purchase orders. And what we're going to do is map the purchase order. I think we could do that in Airtable automations. Let's try. So if we say when a record enters view, we are already in enters view and run a script. Technically, after this step, we could add logic that says find records. We're going to go to the purchase order table, find records based on condition, and that condition is where purchase order number is dynamic, and we're going to say where the purchase order number is the purchase order number here. And since the purchase order numbers are identical for it to get in this view, it doesn't matter which one we select. So once we do that, and the purchase order number is found, we can do an update record, and we're going to add in the record ID of this record. Table's going to be inbound invoices, and our field is going to be purchase order, and the ID is going to be this find record ID. So we are going to say oops, let me go back. I believe it's this one here. And we're going to click update. So let's test this out. I'm going to go here and pretend these purchase orders are not the same. So I'm going to change this to 22. So it's going to go back into this grid view. Let's find that purchase order 22, 23. It's back in this view, and we have the purchase order attached. So now that the purchase order is attached, technically, I could add a lookup field for purchase order amount, and then technically I could say amount mismatch, and I could add a formula that says if purchase order amount not equals amount, comma. So I could just add like a flag or something like that. So it's going to have a mismatch because this is 5,000 where this amount is 1,287.40. Technically, I could do that, and then there's no amount mismatch because these are the same. So you could get fancy essentially, and we could add another view that says only process if the amounts are identical and there's no mismatch, essentially is what I was getting to. However, as it stands, it does work. It'll go through consensus. Let's just run through that workflow once. If we run this and we go to our automations, I'm just going to emulate this automation here. We'll do this first one, run automation, and it'll just step through all these processes, and it'll go through here. So it happened really fast, but we got this consensus ID. We have a filter here that says if it's consensus, that means it's in its completion stage, so go down this path. Otherwise, it goes down this other agent path. So it goes down this path. It gets the record. It searches for the record. Well, it gets the record ID, and then it finds purchase order. Let's say, rename this, find PO, and then looks for vendors, and then maps a vendor with creating a bill. It's worth noting here, when I click this, I could do further mapping because this is set to advertising and marketing. I could have it set to any number of things, and I could even have the language model determine that. So the language model could even look at the invoice and determine what account it goes into based on some rules. And of course, gets the file and then uploads it to Google Drive. You could have it upload anywhere. It doesn't have to be Google Drive. Could be Box. It could be Microsoft. It could be Dropbox. It could be Amazon S3, any data store you want. SharePoint, you could upload the files to. So you could easily integrate this automation with like Microsoft Dynamics or Oracle, NetSuite, another ERP. That's how we've seen it integrated in the past, but it's really flexible and it does save a lot of time if you do find or are one of those accounting departments that have to do a lot of manual invoice processing. Even if you have to clean up some of these and you have to like, I built an interface for like reviewing, like a really generic one, but even if you had a review step and you had to like look through and see which ones are mismatched and, you know, clean some items up, or maybe we add a checkbox to process, or we manually fix it, which would manually put it in that step. It's still less work because you're just doing a quick review and saying, oh, I see the mismatch. It's because the purchase order was written in cursive and it was written across the invoice. So let's manually add the purchase orders, and then would automatically get passed back to the agent for the agent to then create that bill. And it also helps if you have people that you want to have interactions with QuickBooks or NetSuite, but you don't want them to have access to the accounting software. This is a way that people can create bills and kind of interact with QuickBooks data without actually getting into your QuickBooks. So I hope this was useful. I have a question. If you like this style of breakthrough without me actually building the automation, let me know in the comments. Because I did do a build version of this. It was just really long. It didn't get to the point as fast as a walkthrough. So if you like build versions, let me know. Maybe I'll release those in my school community or something, or maybe I'll kind of mix that with some of these public releases with the full version. But this is just a streamlined version of it. So anyways, I will leave instructions for this in the notes. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, enjoy, subscribe for more content like this, and I will see you in the next one.